I'm the guy rich families pay to hang their Christmas decorations. I'm never going back to the Dumont house. 10 months out of the year, I paint houses. But during the holidays, I decorate them. Rich families pay my team top dollar to hang lights on their mansions. But money isn't everything. And after this year, I'm never going back to the Dumont house. Every town has its haunted house. This is ours. While the Oregon story varied from suicidal stockbrokers to tragic holiday accidents, everyone agreed the place was haunted. Each year when the old widower calls, we draw straws. The two losers get stuck with the job. This year, it was Marco and I. We pulled up to the old Victorian and set our sights on the home's 4-story turret, looming over the property. We'll start from the top and work down, I reasoned. Marco held the ladder, and I started up with the strand of lights. The ladder flexed under each step, and tried I not to look down. As I passed the highest window, I caught a glimpse of movement between the curtains, probably Dumont, checking on my progress. I reached up for the gutter with a plastic clip in my hand. The ladder jerked back from the house, almost throwing me off. "Shit!" Marco yelled below me. I tried to throw my body weight forward to avoid the point of no return when the ladder would topple over backward. Despite the effort, I felt myself moving further away from the eaves. By chance, I looked downward, and what I saw made my blood run cold. The window I had passed on my climb was no longer closed. A woman leaned out of the opening, clutching the side rails. Her golden hair was stained a dark color on one side, where it was matted to her head. She looked up at me with an expression of twisted contempt as she pushed again, sending me further from the house. The ladder came a little closer to toppling, before teetering back toward the turret. The woman adjusted her stance. I immediately realized what she was doing. She was going to try pushing me sideways, where Marco couldn't stabilize the ladder. Before she could, a second figure, a man in blue coveralls and a yellow cap, shoved her through the open window before slamming the sash with a loud thud. Her form evaporated into mist as soon as her entire body left the house. The ladder clattered back against the building, leaving me clinging to the rungs with sweaty palms and a hammering heart. Back on the ground, Dumont offered me an apology and a wad of cash to keep quiet about what I saw. I refused both. Marco and I packed up our gear and left without a word. As we pulled out of the drive, I looked back up at the window. It had opened again. That same woman stared down at me, bony fingers curled around the sill. This occurred a couple of years back, nearly 2 weeks before Christmas. At the time, I was a 16-year-old girl. Bobby was 11 and Mo was 13. It was one of those late nights around 11:30 p.m., right in the midst of the Christmas break. We were gathered in my mom's room chatting away, my sisters, Bobby, Mom, and me. It was a regular thing for us to huddle together and have these talks. As we neared the end of our conversations, bidding each other good night, my mom casually mentioned she wanted a glass of water. It's a crucial detail for this tale. We avoid storing water bottles in the house. Dad has this habit of reaching for them, taking a sip or two, and then opting for a new bottle when he's thirsty again, even if the one he just took is still half full. It tends to bother Mom, so she keeps the bottles in her truck. Anyway, that night, Mom requested Mo and me to grab a few bottles from her vehicle. I grabbed her car keys, and we stepped outside to fulfill her request. Upon reaching our front gate, I signaled to Mo to join me. She declined, citing the cold weather and her reluctance to carry additional bottles. Shrugging it off, I strolled down the driveway toward Mom's vehicle. As I walked, I noticed a dark figure stationed in the middle of the street. Dismissing it as someone passing through, I convinced myself they were likely heading somewhere. Gathering the water bottles, I couldn't shake the sense that the person remained eerily motionless, lingering in my peripheral vision. As I shut the trunk and secured the car, I caught him turning his head, fixing his gaze directly on me. A shiver ran down my spine. I bolted up the driveway, slamming the gate shut, and hurried inside, making sure to lock all the doors. I recounted the unsettling encounter to my mom, prompting her to call my dad and request that he check who was lingering outside. Dad arrived home roughly an hour later. Strangely enough, that same figure was still there, unmoved, until Dad approached him and exchanged a few words. Only then did the person finally depart. 2 days later, my grandma requested that I take some money to our neighbors for an entirely unrelated matter. I was lounging in my comfy slippers, so I asked Mo and Bobby to handle it. They consented, but with a condition. I had to stay outside the gate and keep an eye on them. The two of them walked over to the neighbor's front door and knocked. No answer. They lingered for a couple of minutes before knocking again. That's when I spotted the same guy I had seen standing in the street 2 nights prior after their first knock. As I observed, the same figure was strolling up the street once more. A sense of unease crept over me, and I wished for our neighbor to hasten their response. He was drawing closer, only 2 houses away, when she finally answered the door. With their errand completed, the girls bid farewell to our neighbor and began their walk back home. They had almost reached the end of the lady's lengthy driveway when the man stood at the beginning of it, a mere 10 steps away from the girls. Suddenly he began to laugh, a chilling, solitary sound that echoed through the silent night. The girls understandably became spooked and hastened their pace up the driveway. As they did, the man quickened his steps, his gaze locking onto me as I stood by the gate waiting for them. He looked me in the eye, bit his lip, and started whistling an eerie tune. By this time, the girls had made it inside the gate. However, the man continued up our driveway, still whistling that haunting melody. I gestured for him to stop, shaking my head, but he only laughed once more. He had traversed halfway up the driveway when my dad emerged. Unaware of the situation, Dad had yet to notice him, but the man certainly took notice of Dad's arrival. With a smug smirk on his face, he locked eyes with me and uttered, "You got lucky this time." He sauntered toward the sidewalk on the opposite side of my house, still whistling that haunting tune. Naturally, I immediately recounted the incident to my dad, who was livid with the guy. He attempted to locate him after I told him, but the man had already fled and couldn't be found. Later that night, much to my dad's surprise, he spotted the same man walking down our street again. Without hesitation, Dad approached him, demanding to know what he was up to. With a smirk aimed at my dad, the man casually turned and walked off. Dad promptly reported the unsettling encounter to the police, but by the time law enforcement arrived, the man had vanished. The following day, my sisters and I noticed a cluster of around 5 police cars parked at another neighbor's house. Intrigued, we informed our dad about it, knowing he was close friends with those neighbors. An hour later, there was a knock on our door. Police officers were there to speak with us regarding the same man who had stood in the street and walked up our driveway. He attempted to abduct and assault the 10-year-old daughter of our neighbor. It seems that the man entered the young girl's bedroom through the window, attempted to undress her, and when she cried out, he grabbed her by the hair and began beating her. When her older brother heard what was happening, he alerted their parents to come inside even though they were in the backyard. The man was knocked down by the little girl's father, who then began to beat him mercilessly. The mother phoned the police in the interim. They arrived at the house quickly because we live close to a police station. They questioned him and discovered that he had second-guessed his decision to pursue me over the other young girl. In addition, he said to the police that he had occasionally observed me making my way from school, but that he was never able to intervene because I was constantly with friends. When I would go out in shorts and a tank top on the weekends, he would remark on how attractive I looked. He informed him that he had even searched through our correspondence to see what my name was. He acknowledged that he had a strong interest in me. I was afraid to be at home after this. I didn't feel secure in my own house, even if the man was now incarcerated. The idea that any scum would think of me in such a repulsive way appalled me. When I requested to visit a therapist a month later, I discovered that it was incredibly beneficial. I can now finally talk about the entire incident. I count myself as quite fortunate. It was Christmas Eve, and I was taking my girlfriend home by car. My aunt's home in Estacada used to host a big party hosted by my mother's relatives. Despite it being her first time, my girlfriend got along well with my extended family. We talked, played poker, opened presents, and drank a variety of adult beverages for the better part of the day and evening. By the time we had to go, my girlfriend was pretty drunk, and so I would be taking us home by car. It was approximately 11 p.m. I was traveling on Highway 211 in my girlfriend's vehicle. These days, farmland and thickly wooded areas encircle this road, which is partially illuminated. But since I was raised here and know this road by heart, there's nothing to be afraid of. Just the two of us, two young lovers making the most of our time together, were conversing and driving. A section of the highway follows the contour of a massive hill, before navigating a deep brook. There are no lights and dense forests on each side of the route. The region right in front of our headlights was all that was visible. I drive through more forest, over a bridge, and down a hill. That occurs just as the freeway begins to level out. Abruptly, something darts across the road, nearly colliding with me. I apply the brakes firmly. I ask my girlfriend whether she noticed that as I turned to face her. She acknowledged having, but even she was unable to identify what it was. Given how frequently they are seen in this region, it's possible that it was a coyote. But there was a strange vibe about it. Whatever it was that darted in front of the vehicle vanished into the roadside woods. Coyotes don't typically dart out in front of moving vehicles, not in any case like that. For whatever reason, I decided to look into it. To better illuminate the forest where this monster had disappeared, I reversed the direction of the automobile and engaged the highlights. I asked my girlfriend why she had leaned so heavily on the horn as I made my way back inside the vehicle. Instead of responding, she pointed to a location that was roughly 50 feet away from where I was. That's where I noticed it when I turned to gaze in that direction. This must have been the object that darted in front of our vehicle. There was a man there, and he was nude. He had mud and grime all over his skin, and he had a hatchet in one hand. He glanced at us back, grinned, and waved, shortly before reversing course and heading back into the woodland. It goes without saying that we left. After we resumed our safe driving, my partner gave me an explanation of what had transpired. He turned back around and emerged from another location in the forest, outside the beam of my car, as I was trying to find the men in the area where he had first disappeared. It was out of the corner of her eye that my girlfriend noticed something, and that's when she noticed him. He was approaching me and holding out his hatchet like he was about to hit me when she sounded the horn. Once we were safely back home, we phoned the police, but they never came across anyone. If not, they merely failed to inform us. But the officer with whom we spoke went over his theory. It was clear that the man's intention was to ambush gullible lone tourists for whatever reason. In any case, we all agreed that my girlfriend's quick thinking prevented my death by letting my would-be assassin know that I wasn't alone. I recently relocated back to the area, so I now frequently go on that highway. Though I haven't seen the naked hatchet man yet, I can assure you that I'm now extra cautious, especially along the deep creek. That was in 2019. I was living in a townhouse about 10 minutes walk from campus during my second year of college. At the time, I shared a house with two other females, but they were all spending the holiday with their parents. I work in the medical field, and this Christmas, I was at work. A brief history in pictures. 4 of us used to live there, but one girl moved out because of problems with her boyfriend. He was only meant to visit occasionally, and was a jackass who took advantage of our generosity by staying there, but in the end, he made himself at home there. After an episode one night where he got violent with her and verbally abusive with the rest of us, we told her she needed to kick him out. We told her we would have to speak with the landlord then, but she would not listen. In the end, she moved out and left us all feeling badly about it. On a different topic, I can relate to how things might have been going for her because I had previously been in a physically and mentally abusive relationship. At that moment, I spent 2 years doing all in my power to help her see the abuse and get away from him. She moved out because we didn't feel secure having him around at this time, and it was having an impact on everyone. Let's go back to the narrative. I was getting ready for bed on Christmas Eve because I had work the following day. I went downstairs to my bedroom, locked the doors, and turned out the lights. I spent almost an hour going through 6 o'clock. By now, it was Christmas Day. I heard what sounded like the kitchen chairs moving. My bedroom is directly above the kitchen. Since our walls are shared and our neighbors can occasionally be noisy, I reasoned that I might be hearing them. However, I did recall that while they were all away, one of them texted me to beg me to bring in a parcel that they were anticipating. I ignored the sounds because it didn't last long. The door to my bedroom is slowly opening the next thing I know. I had a flashback to this moment when I was told of the break-in at my second-grade teacher's residence, and the way she pretended to be asleep. They wouldn't need to harm her if she spotted them, if their only intention was to rob her. However, my terrified fallen jaw is glowing on my phone screen. I thus cannot pretend to be asleep. I was lying in bed with my face facing the door. Thus we were staring at one another. This guy had one foot in my bedroom with the door ajar while I was lying in bed pissing myself. He softly closes my door after taking his foot out. I sat there in total disbelief. I was staring at my phone screen, my eyes adapting to the darkness again, and I had no idea what he looked like. All I saw was a baseball cap on backward. I was nervous because I knew that if I phoned the police, my parents' phones would be notified that I had made the call. Being a complete moron, I reasoned that I didn't want to bother them. In addition, I was afraid he might still be inside the house, and I had no idea what to do in the event he heard my call. I then informed the guy I was seeing via text that someone had broken into our home and entered my room. I eventually called the cops after he finally got me to stop acting irrationally. In order to avoid having to break it down, the dispatcher asked if I felt secure enough to open the front door for them. And even though the door was damaged, I told her there was no way. I was not going to walk there by myself. After a few minutes, flashlights may be seen shining through my window, and I hear the police making their presence known by knocking on the door. They asked me where I was as soon as they entered. When I eventually emerged from my room, they caught me. One of them stayed with me while the other two went through the house, and they told me to wait on the back porch. It resembled the kind of garbage you see in movies, where people turn the corner with their partners with their weapons out and everything. I mentioned that nothing seemed to have been taken, but they were unable to locate anyone. They even made an unsuccessful attempt to obtain fingerprints. They began interrogating me and telling me that there were no traces of damage and the back door was unlocked. However, I assured them that I had locked it. Even though the guy I was talking to stayed with me that night, I was still having trouble falling asleep. I was constantly having to go inspect every part of the house. I tucked chairs beneath the handles of every door, in my bedroom as well as the front and back. Our landlady was notified the following day, but she declined to come out and change the locks. For the duration of our stay there, she never changed them. I now double-check that all the doors have been locked before turning in for the night. Where I am doesn't matter. Now that I have a dog, he and the new doorbell I recently bought both lessen my fear of intruders. It was, I think, our former roommate's boyfriend. Given that he was essentially living there at one point, I believe they might have had an extra key for him. However, I fail to see why he did nothing to harm me, our home, or our possessions. I don't understand why. If it had been someone random, they wouldn't have carried out their intended action, and that was one of several possible outcomes. Subscribe if you're interested in more creepy videos.